Hello. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a pivot table. The summary that is being done here will be a count. I will also discuss how to obtain a row percent and the associated 100% stacked column chart. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with our example. The example that I'm going to use here is the Titanic dataset. The response variable being considered will be whether or not the individual survived, and the predictor variable under consideration will be traveling alone. To begin, I'm going to want to highlight all of the data, and I can do that to the left of column A and above row 1. So that little box in the corner there. And then I'm going to select Data and then Pivot Table. The pivot table is going to, by default, want to be placed onto a new sheet. And that's a good idea because we don't want to mess up the data that we have. So leave it on the default setting and select Create. A pivot table consists of rows, columns, and values. So all three will need to be specified for your pivot table. The rows are used for the predictor variable, so here whether or not they're traveling alone. Over here on the right is the pivot table editor. Underneath rows, we'll select traveling alone. The columns will be used to specify the response variable. So under Add for columns, we will want to specify the response variable, which is survived. Next, we need to identify what is going to be put into the middle part of the table, or the heart of the table. And here, that's just going to be the count of survived. So under Values, we're going to select the response variable again, and then make sure that the summarized by is on count here, as it is. So this is what my pivot table looks like, and we can do some editing to that pivot table if we'd like. We can make the font a little bit bigger. We could center everything in the table. We can pull column A across so we can see what's being summarized there, and we again can see that up in the upper left-hand corner here, or in cell A1, it's telling me that it's doing a count. We notice that the pivot table by default will count blank rows, even though there are none. If you'd like to remove that information, we can specify under Filters the response variable again, or we can do the predictor variable. So if I do traveling alone here, and then from the drop-down menu, I'm going to want to deselect blanks, and that will remove the blank row for traveling alone. So here's what my pivot table looks like. And we can see that there were 258 people that were not traveling alone and that did not survive. 261 were not traveling alone and did survive. We can see the totals here for the rows and also the total for the columns. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our row percentages now. In Google Sheets, that's very easy to do. You just need to place your cursor somewhere in that table, and then down here under Values, under the Show As tab, you're going to want to select percent of row. So again, I'm under Values box, Show As, percent of row. And that'll convert those to row percentages. So here we can see that about 50% of the people that were not traveling alone survived. And also about 50% that were not traveling alone did not survive. The percentage for those traveling alone that did not survive is somewhat higher, almost 70%. So how do I create a 100% stacked column graph? To do that, I'm going to want to highlight the data that I have. So again, not the grand totals, but just the data that I have. Their labels as well. So the 4 cells and the labels for the rows and the labels for the columns. And then under Insert, I'm going to select Chart. And we can see we get a bar graph with the percentages, but this is not a 100% stacked version of that graph. So to do that, we're going to select under our Setup tab, Under bar chart, we're going to select this one here. That is the 100% stacked column graph. You can also do the horizontal one, which is the 100% stacked bar chart as well below it. I'll go ahead and do the vertical one. So here you can see now that the percentages add up to 100%. Doing some editing on this if you would like. So we can click on the series here. So the blue, which is those that did not survive, would be the blue. We can change those to maybe a red color, because those are people that died, so that would be bad. We can add the data labels to those if we'd like. And then we can do some editing on that as well. The position is where would you like the data labels placed if we want to put those in the middle. We can increase the size of those if we'd like, underneath the data label font size. And then we'd want to probably change the other series as well, just because those colors are so similar. So these are individuals that did survive, so maybe let's make those green. And then we can add data labels, to those as well. Again, specifying center, a font size that's easier to read. If you want to do things like change the title, you can do that by just double-clicking on the title, and that is found under the Customize Chart and Axis Titles. So we can do something like Relationship in Survival and Traveling Alone. And that'll change the title. If you want to switch back to the actual numbers, again, I can just put my cursor in that table somewhere and then take off the Show Values As. If I want to just change to the values or the counts, I'm going to specify default there. And the values change up here in the table, and they also change here on my graph. Notice that the y-axis here, though, is still the 100% stacked column graph. Okay, that does it then for a pivot table, row percentages, and creating a 100% stacked column graph. Thank you.